welcome to yet another episode of our podcast series, Alumni Talkies. My name is Haroon, and I'm delighted to be your host for the day. With us today from the 2007 batch is Mr. Rutujoy Chakraborty. Rutujoy is currently the Group Manager, Product Strategy in Royal Enfield, where as a global lead, he helps develop aspirational Royal Enfield motorcycles. He has more than 17 years of experience working with leading names like TVS Motor Company, Bajaj Auto Limited, Mahindra Group, and more. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. Hope you're doing well.
Thank you, Harun. Doing well. I hope you guys are staying safe. I don't know if you're in campus or if you're at home, but wherever you are, I'm sure you're taking utmost precautions. The pandemic is still not gone. I mean, this is a bit of a pause. I just hope things get better from here, hereafter.
Yes, sir, we are taking all the necessary precautions and we also hope for the best. Moving ahead, sir, as you've worn multiple hats in the professional journey, working in sales, brand management, and currently in product strategy, what would be some skills you feel an inspiring marketeer currently who is still in college should try and inculcate so as to be better equipped for the industry?
Sure. Happy to have that question. And a quick, a disclaimer for the listeners. I've got a bit of a cough today, so please, in case in between there's a bit of a disturbance in between, please forgive me. So, first of all, very happy to be, interacting even at a virtual level, with my alma mater. Very fond memories of SMHRD, and I'm sure you're a bright, bunch of young guys over there, and wish I could be there with you, interacting individually, but in the current scenario, well, this will have to do. Interesting question. Let me try and break that up into the certain experiences and learnings I've had over the years. I think the most important thing is in marketing, you still remain, very committed and remain focused on the fundamentals. I mean, as boring and as archaic the 4 Ps may sound, and I believe now there are 6 Ps and 8 Ps and God knows how many Ps. In our days, it was quite simply the 4 Ps and it was Kotler. Believe you me, the fundamentals have not changed. It's still the same. You still, focus on product, positioning, price, place, and that's pretty much it. I mean, and obviously there are ancillaries, you do focus on, but the fundamentals remain the same. No matter which industry, which category you're working on, as long as you're focused on the fundamentals, it is just a matter of calibration. That is number one. The second thing that I would, that I would advise, and that is something that I have, inculcated from people wiser and more experienced than me over the years, is having empathy for the customer. Never, feel that the customer, knows less than you because you passed out from this fancy B school, and the customer is sitting in some, some small town in suburban rural India. The customer is ultimately making a choice, with his or her hard-earned money of her family, in between choosing your product over the competition. So the customer is doing something every day which involves a lot of decision, a lot of conviction, and ultimately he or she is putting faith in your brand and your product and your service. So my suggestion is never, when you're in marketing, never talk down to the customer, rather talk to the customer. We all know what David Ogilvy says: the customer, is not stupid. The customer is your wife. So I think the age-old adage still holds true. So always have empathy for the customer. This is something that I believe is very, very important, and I have personally seen that it works. Third is, and I think the most important thing in marketing that I think, and this is getting lost sometime in this age of social media and the age of more and more and more. I think less is more, and I think this is something that I feel very very strongly, not only on a professional level but even on a personal level. When you declutter your own space, your own working table, your own your own home, your own working environment, your own mind, what happens is you're able to focus more on what you really want to do and what you really want to say. Similarly, when it comes to marketing communication, I think there is a tendency or there is a risk that we try and say, ye bhi hai, wo bhi hai, ye bhi le lo, wo bhi le lo, and you try and ultimately make a hash of everything that you're trying to say. In contrast to that, if you were to say very sharply that, look, this is what I'm about, this is what my brand and my product is about, what you do is you leave a message in the mind of the customer which doesn't go away that easily. And whenever the customer has to think of, a certain product or a service that he requires, your brand should pop up in his mind subconsciously. I think that is something that you achieve by being sharp, by being focused. So I think less is more is is a very old saying, but I think that again has become very relevant in today's world when we're bombarded by messages on social media, when we're bombarded by communication. And I think that's something that I would really advise my young friends to inculcate as they go forward in their upcoming careers.
Great, sir. I'm sure these points would add a lot of value and give a perspective to the bunch of students still in college, still looking to be professional marketeers.
Sure.
And in your answer, you mentioned about marketing in other industries as well. So now that you've worked with major players in the automobile industry and you said that the core remains the same, could you please elaborate a bit on that? How the marketing core remains the same, irrespective of the industry that we are talking about?
Well, I'm not the right person to comment on the other industries. I mean, I have very close friends who are ex-classmates from SIMBI and other places who are working in FMCG, who are working in consumer durables, who are working in telecom, and so on and so forth. I mean, I think they are the right persons to comment on this. Of course, we have a lot of long conversations, chats, debates, arguments, and it's a lot of fun. I think the principles remain the same. I mean, principles, fundamentals, whatever we call it, I think the principles remain the same. That is something that I've learned from them over all these years. I think what differs is the calibration. Like when you're selling a shampoo versus when you're selling a car or a bike. I think in this shampoo, the communication, the messaging takes preeminence because ultimately one shampoo versus another. Not to take away anything from the shampoo industry, it's a billion-trillion-dollar business, I'm sure. So the difference is the consumers, probably the involvement with maybe a 50 rupee bottle or a 100 rupee bottle of shampoo is not as high as that maybe with a 10 lakh rupee car. So how do you sell shampoo versus how do you sell a car? I think the consumer involvement is different. So your quality and your focus on messaging on the shampoo becomes far more important and far more impactful than maybe your communication on a car ad, because ultimately the car stands for itself. It has to, and a car is very different from another car. You can't put two cars together and say, okay, it's a apples to apples comparison. It never will be. Any product which is a high consumer involvement category, there will never be apples to apples comparison. So I think the focus on communication is the reason to believe that, okay, how is this impacting your love? How does ABS help you? How does ventilated seats help you, and so on and so forth. So how do these, so selling the sub parts, the features, more than the vehicle itself. I mean, many car companies, automobile companies have started, tried selling a lifestyle. Some have succeeded. Companies which like my own company, Royal Enfield, we don't sell sub parts of a bike, but we sell, or rather we sell the dream, the lifestyle of owning a Royal Enfield and what it does to your life. We say, be reborn, which basically says, rediscover yourself, rediscover the world, rediscover the joy of riding. So that's a very different way of saying, of selling a vehicle rather than selling, a certain feature of a vehicle. And I think certain companies have succeeded in it, certain companies have failed. However, when it comes to, I think, the more FMCG, the lesser ticket price, the lesser consumer involvement categories, the messaging style is very different because ultimately the product that you're selling is in a completely different ballgame.
Exactly, that does make sense. Moving ahead and diving a bit deeper into the automobile industry, the market requirements and marketing strategies vary from region to region based on a variety of socio-economic factors. So, having worked in MTD for the Latin America and Africa regions, how stark was the difference in customer expectations of the products in comparison to India? And what could future marketeers as well as current industry giants in the automobile sector change in order to make access to the products easier?
Okay, so quite a long question with a lot of sub questions in between. I'll try and answer the bits which I understood very clearly. Latin America, Africa, India. Okay, so to begin with, I think these are extremely different geographies, and in some ways they're very similar in some ways. So if you look at Africa, I'll talk about Africa first because I spent a considerable amount of time traveling and visiting, and going deep into the countries. We're going deep into around 15, 20 countries I've visited across the continent. So, well, first of all, there's no one Africa. Africa is a continent of 54 countries. There is what we call the sub-Saharan Africa, which is essentially, the Kenya, Tanzania, and the West Africa, the Francophone, the French-speaking Africa. There is what is the Northern Africa, which is essentially a desert country, the Sahara and the Arab countries, so Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia, and those countries. And then you have the Southern Africa, which is essentially South Africa, Namibia, and so on and so forth. So there are many Africas within Africa. I mean, like India, we have like thousands of languages. Africa has thousands of languages, thousands of cultural denominations, tens of thousands of tribes, hundreds of religions, and so on and so forth. So Africa, clubbing Africa into one, I think would be an injustice to the continent. Having said that, the major part of the business that is concentrated in certain areas, I think it's on a growth path. The countries that where majorly the Indian companies like Bajaj and TVS, Tata, Mahindra, they are selling. I think they're still on a growth path. The countries have huge aspirations. They are looking for personal mobility. They're looking for better solutions, that improve the quality of their lives and their families. So I think right now it is at a stage which is maybe where maybe India was 25 years back. Personal transportation is just about starting over. People's ability to purchase is increasing, and it's right now it's more of entry point and value based purchase rather than more of, let's say, lifestyle and discretionary purchase. So Africa, huge opportunity. It's absolutely the sunrise continent. It is without doubt the growth driver of the future. So I think for anybody who has opportunities in Africa, I would absolutely support and encourage you to consider those opportunities. It's a fantastic place to learn, explore. It's a fascinating continent. It's a vast place. It's beautiful. It's green. It's cold. It's hot. The people are warm. The people are friendly. The people appear sometimes to be intimidating, but they're not. They're just it's a great place to be. So if you do get time, do spend time in Africa. I mean, that is what I would say, both as a maybe whether in sales, whether in marketing, whether in product development, it doesn't matter. It's a great place to go and learn and see what the future is headed. Coming to Latin America, now Latin America is very interesting. They're essentially Europe's poorer cousins. I mean, in a way, I mean, they're essentially Europeans. They derive their ancestry back to Europe or to indigenous populations in South America. They have European tastes. At the same time, they appreciate value. Their approach to purchase is quite similar to Indians. They're ultimately looking for value. Like Indians, we are not price conscious. I always say this. We are value conscious. You show an Indian value, he will spend much more than you expect him to. I think Latin Americans in many ways are the same. The only difference is I think Indians, we have a very robust culture of saving. I think Latin Americans are more about, let me party and enjoy life, and I'll think about tomorrow when tomorrow comes. So I think this is a difference in approach, as a big result of which there is a lot of purchase on loan, a purchase on financing. So most of the stuff that maybe Latin Americans will buy is maybe more based on financing. Whereas Indians, we have a habit that maybe we'll try and put down maybe a substantial amount of money upfront and reduce my interest cost, because we just feel that is more financially more prudent. Well, there are two views to that, but this is a difference in culture. But I think fundamentally the aspirations are very similar. They have already acquired the basic things in life as Indians have, and now they're looking for the next step. The next discretionary purchases, a better car, a better home, a better bike. So I think we're on a similar growth curve as most parts of South America is. So when it comes to the marketing strategies, when it comes to the new product development strategies, you will be surprised to know that many companies now in India, who are among the biggest companies like Bajaj, TVS, Royal Enfield, Mahindra, Tata, and so on and so forth, they're among the biggest in their categories in the world, not just in India but globally. Now today, all these companies that I mentioned, they have a global footprint. Most of them have businesses in at least 40 to 50 countries, some even more than that around the world. So many of them, when they actually develop the new products, they actually develop keeping India in mind, of course, which is of course the home market and one of the biggest. But they also keep in mind markets like Latin America, maybe parts of Middle East, parts even of maybe Southeast Asia, South Asia like Bangladesh, Nepal, and even parts of North Africa as well, Southern Africa to some extent as well. So I think the planet is definitely globalized. I mean, the term may be overused and maybe old, but as far as Indian companies are concerned, today we're actually global. I mean, today all these companies that I mentioned, they're MNCs. So their marketing and product development strategies follow the same footprint.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That does give a deeper understanding of the whole picture at a global level. So, considering sustainability has become a need of the hour, a lot of two-wheeler automobile brands have entered the EV market, the electric vehicle market. Is that a possible future for Royal Enfield as well, while maintaining its cult image?
Difficult to answer this without getting into the areas which are more confidential and specific to a particular company. Rather, let me talk about what is happening in the overall two-wheeler space when it comes to electrification. I think electrification is surely here to stay. It is something that is going to grow by leaps and bounds in the time to come. I think what we have to be cognizant of is what is the application of the vehicles that we're talking about. So whether it is scooters, it is bikes, it is maybe something like powered bicycles, or even cars and SUVs to that extent. I think the application will dictate the level of electrification. I mean, obviously, the government will have a say in it. They will incentivize and disincentivize certain practices. Having said that, I think the ultimately what when it comes to the customer and the customer's choices and the customer uses a vehicle in a certain way, that application will dictate which segment of electrification takes off and which doesn't do so well. Now, for example, I mean, I can see the the use case of scooters, for short distance traveling in urban centers like Delhi, Bombay, Pune, Bangalore, whatever. I think whenever it comes to a short distance travel, I think scooters, the case for electrification becomes very clear, because electric vehicles have a limitation when it comes to range. You can increase range by increasing the size of the battery, but you increase the size of the battery, the overall weight of the vehicle goes up. The cost of the battery is very high because it's largely imported even till now, and there's obviously a fair amount of duties and taxes on it. So as you keep on increasing the range of the vehicle, the cost and the weight of the vehicle goes up. It's pretty much linear over there. So will electrification take off in a large way for every application? I have my doubts. Some I think will do better than others. Having said that, will there be any segment which will have zero electrification? I doubt that as well. I think almost every segment of the auto industry, from the largest trucks, to the smallest scooters, the smallest bikes, I think will have an electric option or an electric solution in the future. I think the only difference will be that which one does better, which is more widely accepted, and which is not so widely accepted, and that will come down to the customer at the end of the day.
Right, sir. Looking forward to what the future has in store. So, since we are talking about electric vehicles, what's your take on innovation in the industry? Is it driven solely by the competition, or there are other factors involved as well?
Oh, very nice, very interesting question. Innovation, I think, is driven by two things. You have definitely hit upon one, which is competition. I think the second thing that drives innovation is the customer and the customer demands. I'll give you a quick example of what happens when you don't have innovation. You look at our neighboring country, Pakistan. I mean, I have no fundamental, disrespect or antagonism towards Pakistan, towards the civilian population. Of course, militarily, politically, we have our differences, and rightfully so. I mean, we know, no Indian, no self-respecting Indian will accept terrorism as a tool of state policy. Having said that, if I leave that aside, if I look at the general population, the civilian population, and I look at the state of the two-wheeler industry in Pakistan, I don't know if anybody has looked into it or do look into it. Just Google it and see the kind of vehicles that are being sold in that country. It's a terrible state of affairs where lack of competition has led to a stagnation, where a lack of development of homegrown brands has led to a stagnation of a market. I mean, today companies, certain Japanese companies, without naming them, are selling products which are stuck maybe not in the 80s but maybe in the 70s, if not in the 60s, and people are buying them because they have absolutely no option. I mean, there's a huge population who are poor, who cannot afford a car, even a second-hand car. So their only mode of transportation, and public transportation we know is not really the best in South Asia, whether it's India, Pakistan, or it doesn't matter, neighboring other countries as well. But what happens is, because they cannot afford any other mode of transportation, so they're forced to buy either these absolutely substandard Chinese products, because China and Pakistan have an open door policy, or they're forced to buy these archaic and almost ancient Japanese products, which are being sold in the country. The reason is very simple: there has been no competition, there has been no encouragement, of domestic players to set up their own R&D, their own manufacturing. And as a result of which, I mean, it's almost like a closed market. There are only maybe 2-3 players, couple of Japanese players, couple of Chinese players, and they sell, whatever junk, whatever, that they wish to sell, and the customer has pretty much no option. I mean, if you look at what they're selling over there, if you look at what's selling in India, it's almost like there's a that has happened between, just across the border. I mean, for that, I credit companies, like Indian companies like Bajaj, TVS, Royal Enfield, who 20, 25 years back decided that, this is our market and we're going to make some world-class products. I compliment, companies like Tata and Mahindra, who are making products that today, can stand, shoulder to shoulder with the best in the world. So I think fostering the sense of competition, which I think the Indian, the Indian political system has done. It has disincentivized the import of second-hand cars and bikes from across the world, which many countries have not. It is extremely difficult and expensive to import cars and bikes into India, whether new or used. So obviously that gives a strong, incentive, and gives a strong, a launching pad for Indian homegrown companies to start investing and developing their own products, their own talent. And that is exactly what has happened over the last 20, 25 years. And I feel very proud to be a part of that process that has happened over the last 2 decades. And today, these products are world class. Today, the technologies that we have, our engine technologies, our designs. I mean, today, people talk about frugal engineering. This term was born in India. How to derive the best out of an engine, out of a process, out of a system. India has taught the world. It's not the Japanese or the Europeans. It's Indian technology and Indian engineering. That is teaching the world how to be efficient and how to do best with the resources and still deliver a great product. So I think the ability to have that environment where you develop your own companies, your own infrastructure, your own talent, your own R&D, that has played a huge role in innovation and fostering the sense of competition in India. And second is, of course, having a vibrant population that is demanding, that is not going to accept something simply because it's made in India or it's an Indian company. Today, an Indian product has to stand up against the best of Japan, the best of Korea, the best of Europe. And still, the customer makes a choice and puts his or her hard-earned money in choosing a product. I think that is a true test. And that is what keeps everybody on their toes and keeps us doing our best every day. So I hope that answers your question, Harun.
Yes, absolutely, sir. And in fact, I'm glad to know these insights, how India has contributed at a global level. And you also talked about the customers' taste. I think today the customers' preference has also changed a lot, and there have been concerns about the environment as well, right? And automobiles ideally are considered to be contributing to the environmental degradation to a great extent. So, are there any age-old trends and ideologies in the industry that you feel can be restructured to reduce the impact?
Okay, so let me tell you this: people, often, make automobile industry as the dartboard to throw darts at when it comes to environmental degradation. And I don't blame you personally or anybody personally for it, because that has become pretty much the norm and the culture. Whenever there's a gray sky in Delhi, people start blaming the cars. They forget about all the other factories and the stubble burning in the neighboring areas of Delhi and so on and so forth. What people don't realize is today, India, for example, has probably the world's toughest norms when it comes to emissions. So today in India, since April 1st, 2020, we have what is called the Bharat Stage 6 norms on emission. So along with the Euro 5 norms, which is prevalent across Europe, Euro 5 and BS6, Bharat Stage 6, are among the toughest emission norms in the world. And today, a single vehicle in India, petrol, diesel, CNG, electric doesn't matter. Well, electric, it's irrelevant, but for any internal combustion engine, whether it's petrol, diesel, or CNG, no vehicle in India today can be sold unless and until it meets the BS6 norms. So I think that is the first answer when it comes to people who question that, why should, cars be allowed at all? Well, if you can have a wholesale, electrification of the public, of the private transport system, if you can set up an infrastructure which is going to the last mile and ability to charge and swap batteries, if you can ensure, an electrification which is the power is not derived by burning fossil fuels and coal, but the power is derived entirely from, let's say, hydropower and renewables, other renewables like solar, but even to some extent, maybe even nuclear power. Well, then I'm on board with that argument. I'm very, very conscious of the environment. I am self-confessed greenie at heart. So, I would be the first person to, accept and propagate, certain such changes. The reality is we're still a growing country. We still have a vehicle penetration, which is among the lowest in the world, For a population of our size, the number of vehicles that we have on the road is still, as a percentage, far lower than most of the leading Western or Far Eastern countries. So I think blaming the auto industry, whether it's the two-wheeler or the car industry, I think for environmental degradation is fairly short-sighted and does not include the larger picture at hand. I think the auto industry has been a leader when it comes to clean technology. Of course, there have been certain black sheep, things like Dieselgate and certain companies trying to cheat the emission norms. I think that was a very dark phase, and I think the companies who are part of that, I'm sure they have learned their lesson. Again, without taking any names. But by and large, I think the auto industry has not only contributed, to making transportation efficient, environment friendly, and as safe as it can be today, as it is, humanly possible, not only in India but globally. I think the kind of the technology which has actually been developed in the auto industry, some of them actually trickle down to other facets of the of human life, and they actually make our society better. So I think we have to be a little bit more fair with the auto industry when it comes to environmental degradation. I think the industry is doing a fantastic job when it comes to corporate responsibility. And I think looking at the way at the fast pace at which the industry is adopting electrification and sustainable technology, I think the auto industry will continue to set benchmarks when it comes to environmental stewardship and environmental responsibility.
Looking forward to it, sir. And that does give a perspective of where we are headed, both as a nation and as the industry. So, keeping the time in mind, allow me to go ahead with the last question for the day and centered towards the students and the listeners. So, there are a lot of verticals in marketing. So, someone without a pre-MBA marketing experience might have difficulty in deciding which line to follow. So, how do you suggest our listeners deal with such a situation?
Just go with your heart. It might sound cliched and romantic, but just go with your heart. I believed in the industry that I always followed. I was when you're in MBA, there's a lot of glamour around FMCG and corporate banking. So just go with your heart. If FMCG excites you, go with FMCG. Don't run after FMCG because maybe it's where the big bucks are, or corporate banking is because the big bucks are, because eventually that will fade out. I think if there's something that makes you wake up every day in the morning excited to go to work, that this is something that I want to do, and this makes me happy, I think that is the vertical. Whether it's in marketing, finance, doesn't matter. Do something that really interests you, because ultimately, hey, you're an MBA. You're not today you're not a heart surgeon, or you're not Jane Goodall saving the gorillas in Uganda. You've chosen a certain path, which is a corporate a path of a corporate life. Within that, choose something that makes you happy, that makes you want to go up and go to work every day. I think I would not elaborate on that, because the elaboration would not hold true for each and every vertical. I chose something. I was very focused on auto industry because that is where it really made me happy growing up as a kid. in Tokyo. I mean, I grew up around cars and bikes, and the love for cars and bikes, kind of started there, and that love, became an interest, and that interest became a profession. So I think I would, suggest everybody to just, do what, that really makes you happy. Do something that makes you want to get up in the morning and go to work.
Great. That was really an insightful and interesting session with you, sir. And I hope that our listeners have valuable takeaways from this episode. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harun. I think this was fun. This is something that I've not done before. This was something that I was a bit nervous because speaking to a young bright bunch of people who are my alma mater after so many years. Obviously, I had a few butterflies, but I enjoyed the session, and thank you for so much for the opportunity to talk to you guys, and hope to see you guys in person sometime soon.
You're most welcome, sir. We hope for the same. Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
day.
You too, guys. Bye bye.